Welcome back to History Class with Dr. W and our discussion of the Gilded Age and Progressive Era. We've been discussing the presidents of the Gilded Age, and in this final lecture, we turn to the election of 1892 and the return of a familiar figure, Grover Cleveland, for the final presidency of the Gilded Age. As Harrison's presidency limped into the 1892 election season, there were serious questions whether he would even be renominated, let alone re-elected. As one senator put it, there are two serious objections to Harrison's renomination. First, no one cares anything for him personally. And second, no one, as far as I know, thinks he could be elected if nominated. Despite some interest in the party towards William McKinley and John Sherman, Harrison was renominated. He ran in 1892 against Grover Cleveland, making this the only election in which both parties nominated men who had previously served as president. Harrison, unlike 1888, was unable to campaign vigorously. His wife had fallen ill with tuberculosis, and Harrison couldn't mount any enthusiasm for the campaign. Out of respect for Mrs. Harrison, Cleveland decided not to campaign as well, making the campaign of 1892 a dull and humorless one. Harrison also saw his prospects dimmed by the Homestead Clash, which occurred only a few months before the election. 20 men were killed during the clash, and it evidenced a deep dissatisfaction among American workers. In the 1892 election, Cleveland avenged his defeat from 1888. He won convincing majorities in both the popular vote and the electoral vote. After his defeat in that election, Harrison retired from politics and returned to his law career. He was the last Civil War general to serve as president. Grover Cleveland was uplifted by the convincing victory, which also secured a Democratic majority in both houses of Congress. Unfortunately, he entered office just as a serious depression, the Panic of 1893, befell the country. Banks failed, major corporations laid off workers or closed their doors, and unemployment mounted. Cleveland blamed the Depression on the Silver Purchase Act of 1890 and the rapid expansion of currency, which Cleveland argued was creating inflation. In turn, Americans were hoarding their money rather than spending or investing it, and the economy was failing. Cleveland encountered major opposition in Congress to repealing the act. Western states clamored for even more coinage of silver, not less. Cleveland viciously employed every power at his disposal, not least of which was patronage, to coerce members of Congress to back the repeal. Cleveland succeeded in having the measure repealed in 1893, but it was a Pyrrhic victory. It cost him many political allies and the support of many members of his party. Even worse, repealing the act did not solve the economic problems. In fact, it may have made them worse. The economy continued to sag, and Cleveland simply said that he was powerless to do anything to stop it. The New Deal would eventually change that way of thinking, but that was far in the future in the 1930s. Forcing the repeal of the Silver Purchase Act also exhausted Cleveland's political capital. Congressmen were not eager to support him anymore. When in 1894 Cleveland lobbied for the repeal of the high tariffs established under Harrison, Congress responded by attaching hundreds of amendments to any bill brought up along those lines. He never succeeded in having the tariff repealed. Like Harrison before him, Cleveland also struggled with labor issues. In this case, it was the Pullman strike of 1894. Recall that workers in the town of Pullman struck against the railcar manufacturer, which had raised prices in the company store in the midst of the Depression. Cleveland ordered federal troops to break the strike, and the ugly scene that followed only worsened labor relations all over the country. For 2 days, much of Chicago burned as protesters set fire to railroad cars and buildings. The strike was broken, but it cast a dark shadow over the remainder of Cleveland's presidency. Cleveland was not renominated to run in 1896. The presidency would be won by William McKinley, and Cleveland stepped away from politics in 1897. He retired to Princeton, New Jersey, where he continued to closely watch political affairs. He also became closely involved with Princeton University and became one of its great benefactors. He died in 1908.